Hey folks, thanks for tuning in today. So I had an interesting comment on one of my videos. I've done a bunch of them about, my process for how I make decisions on what to do with American traditional designs, how to, trace real life references, how to use, stamp pack references, those sorts of things. And they were curious about what are the real design choices I use, how do I pick my color palettes, those kinds of things. And so today's video is going to kind of address that, where we're going to go over looking at like Sailor Jerry, Bert Grimm, maybe a couple others. I'm not really sure. I'm going to do some Google searching and ask Chat GPT, of course, because I'm a nerd. Who some of those foundational pioneers are in American traditional tattooing so that we can look at a few specific pieces throughout history and dive into them, right? Dissect the design choices that we now make and we consider classic American traditional, and how that came about, what those design choices are, and how you can make those design choices when you're creating your own custom pieces for your client. So if that sounds interesting to you, I am Clay, the Techie Tattooer, and let's just get to the iPad, folks. All right, folks. So yeah, being the nerd I am, I just decided to ask ChatGPT to give me a chronological list of some of the influential players in the tattoo world. So you can see that from the 1891, the invention of the electric tattoo machine, up through the 1990s. Obviously, this is by no means a comprehensive list. These are just some really quick bullet points so we can do some Google searches together and really make sure that we are understanding the history of where American traditional came from and what those original choices were and how we are adapting those to the new styles of tattooing we're doing today. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just go ahead and look up Charlie Wagner. All right, so here we are, folks, with a original flash sheet that is attributed to Sam O'Reilly and Charlie Wagner both. These are some of the classic designs that you will see even today. And yeah, we're just going to kind of look at what the principles are for creating these tattoos and how to keep them, or how to keep our designs in alignment with these classic style pieces. So first, as we look at this pinup girl here, I know the photo is really fuzzy. You'll notice that there's not really a lot of inner line work on her body. In the back here, you can see that they have the back creases to show that her elbows are coming backwards, right? But that's really about it. All of her line work, right, is pretty much on the outside of the design. And that is a very classic American traditional thing where you won't put lines inside here to accentuate the calf muscle or the thigh muscle there, or some little butt cheek dimple, or, the bicep, or some, a lot of those lines, in fact, all of them are taken out in classic American traditional designs. You can even notice that this piece is a little bit wonky, where she's got really beautiful flowing hair here, but she's also got some hair coming out this way that really honestly doesn't even make sense. And so even the original American traditional designs have some of this, wonkiness that you'll see in a lot of it. But at the same time, you have very classic, beautiful features where even the little knee dimple or divot, right, is accentuated here, where this part is actually really essential to communicating. You can even see that almost kneecap happening there in this part, right? Really nice thigh muscle. Really cool hip to then stomach to then rib cage. Those are really intentional, extremely simple, right? While it's just one line, it still communicates all of those individual pieces of the human body, right? Like in the breast there, you've got the breast, the nipple, the upper breast, and then the rib cage coming up from that, right? So while we're only using the outermost line to define the shape of the woman in this one, we're still being very, very intentional to get as much anatomy in there as we possibly can. And so when you're designing a pinup in an American traditional style, that's a real core factor that you're going to want to keep in mind. Interesting things here, right, is that while we are looking at what, is a rose and we all know to be a rose, it's actually a very simple, almost egg shape, right? A really fat egg shape. It's got three open petals here, and then the classic diagonal petals, right, that are kind of like in that one then the other, one then the other, almost like braid work style, leading up to a really simple opening in the flower petals in the middle. And then it looks like this might even be some kind of like fly or something that's coming down and landing on, a bee possibly landing on this piece. You'll see again that this is where we get a lot of that classic American traditional styling in our leaves, where we've got the leaves that do this, and then have lines that come through to create this sort of idea, right? And that style leaf comes from these beginning ideas in tattooing, right? These first pioneers of electric tattoo machine work. So in one of the videos I talked about recently, I did an American traditional bird from a photo reference. And you'll notice that even though this doesn't have two layers of feathers, it actually still has two layers here, right? And then this is where we get this golden um, outer elbow piece, right, from the eagle, right? That's a very classic treatment that started way back in the beginning of tattooing, where you have this weird, totally non-realistic golden bump that is in that joint of your eagles. And so, right, even here, even though it's not colored gold, it is still done, right? Even though the rest of this eagle is gold and this is open skin, you still see it, right? And now you're actually starting to see the beginning of what you consider the classic American traditional back wing, where this wing doesn't have this golden shape. It actually, in future iterations, you're going to see that this wing becomes the scale type feathers, right? Where that becomes the back wing treatment of the American traditional style. And then the front wing always has that kind of lumpy, right? That sort of thing going on with it. Nowadays, we absolutely do a double layer, right? Something kind of like that for our wing setup. But this is where, and other artists as well, right? But these beginning pieces are where we come up with these classic American traditional shapes, right? Like the eagle head, right? That looks like that with the tongue sticking out of it, right? We've got the little tongue there. We've got the frowny eagle head. And then we've got that classic treatment of just the simple spiky edge to create that bald eagle head area, right? Yeah, so again, we'll move on to this dagger piece here. Very classic designs. Most of the time these days, you'll see this red hilt be done in gold, right? But again, these were much simpler color palettes. Notice how it's just red, blue, and yellow, right? Just red, blue, yellow, those three. And those are the only three colors that you're really seeing. I guess there's a little bit of brown as well, it looks like, possibly. Yeah, it looks like there's a possible brown in here. But for the most part, we're just seeing red, blue, and yellow. I'm not really sure what you could call this color. This might be a tattoo green. And so that's why you'll see a lot of tattoos just using that red, yellow, and then tattoo green, which is kind of a greenish blue color that we'll look into later. And this flash seat absolutely adheres to that really simple three colors only palette. And that's where, again, this is just the beginning of it, but this is why we see a lot of those treatments with classic American traditional tattoos, right? Here we've got the gypsy head, or the tarot woman, as it were, right? Um, Interesting, beautiful nose treatment there with that little bit of the nose bump here, right? That's really cool how they've done that. They've given her that little nose bump, but then still given her that classic, 1950s, starlet look, um, right? That's where we get just this classic chin bump. Even here you've got the I don't even know what to call that, the snot shoot, right? But again, really, really simple lines, the bare minimum required to create the shapes you're looking at. As we look at this, you've got the curly hair pieces that are very classic now for that American traditional design, where you'll do a swoop, you'll put some hairlines through it, and then you'll shade really hard along one side, shade really hard along the other side, and then in the middle, you'll have your skin break, right? And you'll see that all throughout this piece, where you've got these swoops that come through with a curl shape, and then shade really hard up against it, shade really hard up against it, and keep that open skin break in the middle. As we look at this, we're seeing those same sorts of rules where there aren't really a lot of inner lines with this pinup design. It is primarily outline shapes, right, that have the bare minimum inner lines to communicate what you're doing. Here, this model does actually have knees, right? Which isn't necessarily something that you're going to see a lot, but it's still just a simple swoop under knee, right? It's not a high detailed, knee piece with, the outer line here or anything like that, right? These are very, very simple designs. Again, as I've said before, with the minimal amount of line work possible to communicate what we want to show. Looking at another classic rose piece, we have the core shapes of the rose that you're going to see alive still today in American traditional tattooing, where you'll see people draw this lower part and some type of leaf across it, right? And then in a lot of the classic designs, we'll actually do a 5-leaf sort of treatment, right? And then up from here, if we wanted to continue this, we would give it one of these, bring it up here, give it one of these, and then possibly even end it there, and then create some sort of inner part in there, right? And then as we're bringing these up, you're going to actually make the leaves smaller than this leaf. And that sort of fakes a perspective of it being tilted this way, right? At a little bit of an angle. But it's these types of classic pieces that inform how we now choose to break down our current American traditional style, right? Notice how this one has that classic leaf center, right? And you'll see this done in yellow all the time nowadays, with black coming up to this edge and fading out. And then we'll do green in the leaf there, right? Notice how the end of the rose has that sort of classic American traditional teardrop shape. right? That's where we get these kinds of shapes and ideas. Also notice how this one actually only has red as the only color in it, right? Again, we're looking at, see how this front wing here has that open shape, but the back wing doesn't, and it's going from pure black shading into nothingness. That's to make sure that this black doesn't conflict with this, and you get a little bit of definition from the body underneath to the shape that's up above the body there, right? Yeah, and a classic sparrow piece. Here, I know that's really, really hard to see, but this is where you're going to get a lot of your classic snake ideas from, where notice how the tongue is super thick, right? And it comes out of this area nice and thick like this. And then really the back jaw is just a line still associated with the tongue here, right? Yeah, and then again, notice how it doesn't have scales, but instead it has these interesting circles that have a borderline on them where it's done black, and then you've got an open circle around it, right? This is where we're starting to see a lot of these classic design elements that we still use today. Yep, this one does have two sets of feathers, right? This one actually does appear to be using the front wing style elbow gold, whatever we're going to call that, right? It does appear to be doing that there, but you'll see in a lot of like the Sailor Jerry work that that doesn't happen. Yep, exactly. Here we've got a really great example of a classic snake. Notice how this is where we're starting to see that style of whoopee whoop, right? Where we got that little M or W shape in the scale work, right? Again, we've got an extremely thick tongue that comes out of this, getting to a smaller piece, but it gets very, very thick at the base there. Classic American traditional design choices. And again, this is where we get them from. Here you're going to see a classic American traditional rose as well, or just, I guess, the traditional flower. Notice how this one only has 4 petals. Nowadays, it's sort of considered standard to make it a 5-petal piece, right? Where most of the American traditional flowers you see these days require the 5th petal, right? And look more like that. But that's still kind of where we're getting the foundation of these types of designs, right? It's where you get these classic, just American traditional. What is that? Oh, it's a leaf, but really it's just a swoopy little shape, right? You see these kinds of leaf shapes in all sorts of tattoos, even in classic black and gray floral, neo-traditional. Yeah, these shapes are still alive today, right? Even these little funny things that don't mean anything. They're not real biological shapes in nature, but they're cute. They're little tattoo filigree pieces that are still alive and well, and what we do to this very day. All right, so now that we're on to Sailor Jerry, you can see how eagle faces and bodies, they've gotten more complex, right? You're starting to see things in them like these fun little cool spike tips, right? The wings still a lot of times adhere to this. Whoops. The wings still a lot of times adhere to this shape, right? It's hard to see with the, so I'll move on to a bright blue. This shape, right? It's a very classic style shape, but notice how Sailor Jerry popularized this whole thing where the front wing has the gold swoop, but this back wing now has those scale type feathers defining it and hiding it a little bit further back, because that way we've got these bright colors up front and then these darker colors in back that push it a little bit further back into the design, right? We still have the classic things like the cross, the shaking hands, right? The traditional sparrow. But notice how this sparrow is a little bit different, where we now have the black top body that you'll see really classically done. It's gotten a little bit fatter, right? Yeah, this one doesn't have any tail feathers inside it specifically. I know he has done designs with them like that, right? Like this one's got the tail feathers in it, right? But again, notice how we're getting more differentiation in the sections of body, right? Where the head has its own section, this little lower part back here has its own section. But again, notice how we're following these, or rather creating these classic American traditional rules where this black piece isn't supposed to have attention called to it. So it's being shaded nice and dark and stuck into the back. And even though this head piece is black, it actually helps it to stand out because it's not conflicting with anything. It has its own space here, right? This wing isn't behind it at all. It's tucked away from it. And so we're not getting any conflicting shapes, and everything has its own individual housing place. This snake is one of the most classic snakes you could possibly see. I'm sure thousands of people have it tattooed on them. And notice how it is a more refined version of what we saw with the other snake designs, where it's got these circles instead of scales. But instead of having the open skin, it's got a green line here, right? But we've still got these circles instead of scales. And then now that we're getting higher detail work, we've got little dots stuck in here as well. And there's no snake on earth that looks like that, but it's a really cool design principle. And notice how we're moving into having just cool pictographic references. These are heart shapes, but notice how they're still kind of following that W pattern in the scaling, right? But Sailor Jerry's taking more and more liberty with reality when he's creating his designs. Here is another classic representation of a rose. Notice how we've got the two lumps here. This is another very classic style, right? And we have the petals coming off that base bulb, and then this sort of circle with a line behind it shape for the centerpiece here. Again, also notice how we're starting to see our classic petal shapes around. And notice how I talked about how the bottom one's bigger and the top ones are smaller. You don't even see the top ones in this because they're tucked behind it to give it this sort of perspective look, right? These petals do have, right, while he's shading from one side to the other, they actually do kind of have these little core spikes in them, right? Notice how that little open section, right? That's what this little fuzzy open section is here, is that little core spike that is the leaves vein. I don't know really what to call that stick area because I don't know my flora anatomy. But anyway, right, we're starting to see classic designs like the American traditional shark. And notice how he's done a really good job of giving this great white nice dark black shading along here, and then a nice black dark tail, because the first thing we want to see our eye drawn to is the mouth. And so that's the lightest, most further, it's the area that looks closest to the viewer, as it were. Notice how he's using a little bitty skin break here in that fin, and he colors this whole thing black to push it into the background to differentiate it from this front fin. But you still leave a little bit of a skin break here to differentiate it from the body of the shark. And then notice how you've got shading back here to denote that it is behind this body lump, right? Those are the classic things that we see all throughout American traditional. Here is another interesting pinup design right? Notice that she does have a little bit more definition, right? You can see she's got a kneecap sort of thing there. She's got a much nicer looking foot and heel shape, right? Um, she has a little bit of rib cage definition, a belly button, what looks like a cute little sexy front pooch, and then possibly even a collarbone shape or an upper boob divot above her breasts there, right? And so, but still, we've still got really classic design shapes, the rib cage, the stomach, the hip, right? Going onto the thigh. And so we're still keeping our designs super, super simple. Right here, we're starting to see the heart with the name banner, right? Different kinds of asymmetrical knife versus the curved knife. But again, we're also seeing it cut through the skin in these classic American traditional styles. But notice how it's not some realistic thing. It's literally just draw a line, and then another couple lines and fill this part in red. Fill this part in red. Call it good. Notice again, though, the simple or reduced color palette where I think we've got green, red, and yellow. And that seems to be it. Mostly this is just black, red, and yellow, but I do think that these are supposed to be green in here. So I think we've got a 3-color palette of black, green, or red, green, and yellow. The classic 3-horse tattoo, right? The classic peacock tattoo. This is where we see this stuff. But again, observe the color palette where we've got green, red, and yellow, and that's it, right? 3 colors. Green, red, yellow. And again, Japanese or Asian art has always been an influence in American traditional tattooing since the very beginning. Again, notice how this back wing has the scale feathers in it, and this front wing has that yellow makes no sense elbow crease. This one does only have one set of feathers, but this subset of feathers that would be there is actually just shaded in all black. This is another classic American traditional treatment. I call this one the frowny face, where this rose has a little mouth that frowns this way and then 2 little eyes that come off it like this and make a little frowny face. And now we're starting to see these classic designs of petal shapes, right? There are 5 or 6 different ones that are very classic American traditional style shapes. Again, we've got the yellow core in these leaves and then the lumpy outlines around it. Again, we also have the big bottom petal and the little tiny top petals, and they get smaller as we go around the shape. Oh, and also floral thingies that make no sense, but look super rad. Oh, and notice how we're starting to see cool things like owls as well. Very, very fun, very, very cool, just to kind of see how these things progress into the future. And so now we're just going to go ahead and jump straight into the future because this video is already way too long. And this sheet is from Kintaro Publishing. Right. And so if we look at this one first, you'll see that the core shapes of American traditional haven't changed, but they have gotten higher detail as tattooing has gotten more advanced, machines have gotten better, all this kind of stuff. But you'll see all these core elements that we saw back in the Charlie Wagner days still present today. Take a look at this rose. This is one of those classic frowny face roses where we've got this little bottom line here, right? The classic little frowny shape, and then the classic frowny eyes, right? That's why I call that one the frowny one, right? And then even in the middle, right, we've got this sort of thing, and then I actually do mine with a little swirl like that as well, right? Very, very classic. You'll even see while this one is about this tall. This one is about that tall. So we've got about double the size of the petals on the bottom to the top. You have the classic center core, but it's gone brown now, and they've changed to these cool red tips, but you still get these nice, sweet little lumps, right? All of those classic elements are still there. They're just being updated, right? We've got some weird, I don't even think these are flowers, but we've got some crazy filigree that makes absolutely no reality sense, but looks great in a tattoo design. You'll see that same thing here where what the heck is this gold bit? Who knows? It doesn't matter. It looks great. But notice how it's coming out of that teardrop shape we saw from the bottom of the other rows. We're keeping all these classic elements, right? We've got the two different styles of leaves here, one with the center line, one without it, right? And the different treatments you have for those. We have a very classic tiger face with a dagger, right? But notice the detail level here. He's got back molars. Now, granted, those back molars are just simple circles with dots in the middle to denote the shadow in the middle of the molar. But that's pretty high detail line work with you've got all these little top of the roof of the mouth lines in there. If you watched my wolf video series where I do the front wolf, you've got the tongue that comes up, the tongue that's this way, right? And then this little swoopy part of the tongue that swoops up. All classic things that if you do a little bit of research, you will see these present in early tattoo designs. American traditional eagle, but notice how we've got these cooler swoops coming off now instead of those basic, just single swoop line from those earlier pieces if you go back to that part of the video, right? Or just go do your own research, right? Even in simple things like this flower, notice how this flower center isn't just a circle anymore. It's now two circles and then a bunch of dots in the inside, right? So everything is just getting more complex as we're allowed to put more and more details into things, right? Like look at these beautiful tail feathers with a front, a midline, and then a super cool little makes no sense divot line in the center there, right? Paying homage to the classic red-tipped wings like I like to do, but like I've said in many of my other videos, you will develop your own personal style, right? Here we've got a rose that fits all the classic things where you've got your egg shape, you've got a representation of the offset petal pattern, right? You've got the bigger petal here, the smallest petal at the top, and then how I like to do mine, that little swirl in the middle, right? That's sort of that newer school thing that you see us do. I don't know, maybe we stole that from Sailor Jerry. I'm not sure who we stole it from, but we do that a lot now. This piece is an absolute awesome new school. It's not new school, but it's the new style of American traditional tattooing that you'll see a lot of geometric flowers organically done like this. They look great. They age great. They're super cool. But this is an obvious new style of paying homage to classic American traditional tattooing. Right? Notice how we saw that Sailor Jerry snake, and this is paying homage to that classic Sailor Jerry snake head. This is actually another style of Sailor Jerry snake head that he did that's not the full sideways view. You can tell because it's got this weird pig snout version. You can find that version classically anywhere online. It's a very cool style piece. But yeah, notice how this guy's going really old school with his treatment. But look at this fun thing he does. He does a hard line here that's all lumpy, and then a cool little gradient at the edge. He does it on every single one. Hard line there, gradient, right? Hard line, gradient, right? He does it on all of them, and it's very, very fun. I like this guy's style. He's got a messier style as well that harkens back to those older school style of tattoos. So that's actually really fun treatment. Um, and here we've got the two butt pieces that you've seen from those other pieces, right? And then notice how that other Sailor Jerry piece came up like this, right? Classic elements that we see in a lot of pieces. And then, oh, check it out. He actually gave us the frowny face too. So he combined two styles of flower and stuck them together. This is another thing that you'll actually see classically done is this scale pattern in the middle of the rose. A lot of people use this scale pattern in the middle of their roses. Again, I'm not sure where it came from, but do your own Google searches, do your own research, and you'll see that this scale patterning is a very classic treatment. You can also tell that this is a newer school or current design because look at how tiny this little star is in here. Look at how tiny this little filigree thing is, right? You never would have gotten a detail level that high in your actual classic American traditional. Notice how you've got little bitty dots in here, but it's a really cool design because he's actually even got those little bitty matching dots in the mouth of his piece here. But notice how he does kind of a wonky style that like I wouldn't necessarily do, where these aren't like evenly spaced dots. Like that like irks my brain a little bit. But again, that's classic American traditional. I'm not throwing shade. It's just like one of those things. But notice how he doesn't have a dot that should go behind that tooth. It's to give it its own nice open space. Notice how it does dip ever so slightly below this mouth line, right? Things like that, right? This back tooth, while it's done in pure black, it is there in the shading. This piece pokes out above this tongue line, and then this piece sinks below that tongue line so that every element has its own individual housing spot, its own individual shape. Here we're seeing classic homage to the American traditional style of hair, where we just get the classic lines running nice and even through it, and then shading in the back, going to the gradient, going to gradient, right? And you can do that as many times as you have little lumps, right? So you shade the lower area and leave a skin break in the upper part of the lump. Here, he's kind of broken that rule a little bit. And the reason he's done that is because this lumps out this way, right? And you want it to kind of have a cohesive hair shine along the piece. But right, notice how he's got the hair shine on this upper part of this lump here, right? And these are all just choices you're going to have to make, right? He's got this part has the skin break here because he's shading here, going out, shading here, going out, and he wants to make sure that there's a nice bit of differentiation between these two hair circles. And then finally, that brings us to this one. Great little set of new school or new traditional tattoo style designs, right? This guy, this is a really crazy, fun little treatment. I don't know what the heck these little things are, but they look great, so I can't complain at all. But notice how it pays homage to that classic butt style design we see with the two leaf or the two petal things coming up the top here. And then instead of doing like I was talking about with the scales that are just plain circles, he's actually filling it with pedal style scales, right? But he's still using all of those core elements that we've been talking about this whole time to create his own new style of designs, right? Even with this, where he's got this shape here, he's got the core centerpiece, and then he shades one side black. It looks like a knife, but he's still got all of those individual elements, right? Notice how he's got the teardrop here at the base of his rose, right? And instead of cute little stem spikes like this, he's got just little like hair spikes coming off it, where understanding what the core elements are and then totally just shaking up that bag and making them unique and experimenting with your own individual style, right? Here, this leaf doesn't have the core centerpiece, but notice how it's got that newer style leaf tip that we saw painted red in the other design. And then it still adheres to those classic leaf patterning ideas like that with the little leaf loops, right? Evil, frowny face rose, right? Big lumps down here, smaller at the top. Classic design elements that never really change. Notice how with this guy, he doesn't have whiskers coming off of here. What did he do? He put whiskers just in the way he did the shading treatment. Very fun choice, right? That's why it's cool to know what your options are and all the different ways you can fudge them around, because these aren't whiskers. They don't come out of his face anywhere, right? They're not coming from here. They're just in the shading. That's really cool. That's a fun way to do that design. Also notice how we have our classic tongue comes over, and then you've got your this piece, right? So this upwards facing tongue is a very classic American traditional treatment. We'll go ahead and take a look at this eagle and just notice how they're kind of getting more and more complex, where now we've got, you'll see this classic nose lump, but oh yeah, we'll give him an even more evil face with this little cool like fang divot in it. And then, oh, what are these little lines? Who knows? They don't make sense, but they look rad. And then notice how he brought this brow shape into the next cool row of feathers, right? It's a really fun design choice that he did there. We have classic eagle legs that can either be done with these cool spiky designs, or you can do them with that little classic single line treatment, right? I actually do like to put the scale style feathers on the front of my eagle legs as well, but I do it a little bit different. But we all do it different, right? We all make our own individual choices. Notice how he's paying homage to the classic circle designs, but he's got it done way simpler, where he's just doing the squiggle, right, with the shade to a line break, shade to a line break, and then really regimented scale patterning here, right, on the stomach scales. I actually really like this specific eagle design. It's really cool. You've got the 2 layers of feathers, the classic top feathers with the spikes that I like to do as well. But then notice how we also added some dots in there that make no sense, but they look good. And those are the kind of choices you're going to want to make. You can even notice how this wing has this golden treatment. And why is that? It's because of the direction it's turned. This is the open area, right? It's the inner part of the wing, so that's why he gave it that treatment. If he'd turned it this way, so you were seeing the top part of the wing, I would be curious to see how he would do that treatment. But because he flipped it so you're seeing the underside of the wing, he makes them identical because it's both the undersides of the wing, right? And so that's just really cool choices that you can make and figure out on your own. Of course, you've got the new classic death head moth, the new classic heart done scorpion, right? And yeah, I think that's enough digging into these shapes to dissect the classic American traditional pieces, but do take note on 5 leaves now, or 5 petals, 5 petals, right? We've moved on to the 5 petal being the standard now for these basic flower, American traditional flower pieces. Not that you have to stick to that at all, right? Notice a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the fifth one's back here, right? So that's just something we've moved to. It is not something that you have to adhere to. Just know what the current trends are, what the prior trends are, and how you're going to make intentional choices to break and bend and modify those rules to adhere to your specific style or to create your own style of American traditional tattooing. Hopefully that helped, folks. Hopefully I can edit this down into a manageable video. Um, if not, I just spend a whole lot of time breathing into the microphone for nothing. Otherwise, I really do hope you found this useful. Please comment below if you have any questions or want to go over specific designs and why I make the choices I do. I'm here for it. That's what this channel is turning into. So, yeah, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to talk about this in the comments. See you guys later.